Hi, welcome back to Mr. Slover's Math. Today we're going to focus on factoring and solving a trinomial. So you're going to be able to solve a quadratic function by factoring. Now this top part may look different than what we're used to seeing. This is just a different organizational tool to achieve the same goal. So I taught it as find the factors of the last term. So I list them out, figure out what the signs are, figure out which ones to add to give me the middle term, and then write those in my answer. We can continue to do that. Okay? This is just a different way to think about it, a different way to organize the information. Okay? So if that's worrisome, if that's throwing you off, just ignore it and just do x squared minus 8x plus 12 and just factor that. So today we're going to solve our trinomials. We're going to factor it first and then we're going to solve. In order to do that, we need to learn or maybe review the zero product property rule. If a times b equals 0, then either a and or b can equal 0. This means that to solve for the solutions, you're going to set each factored form equal to 0. And remember, a factor, so here's my trinomial. This is a factor, what's in parentheses. X minus 2 is a factor. X minus 6 is another factor of this expression. So we're going to be setting these equal to 0. So if you think about it, if I have 3 times 4, what does that equal? 0. If I have 0 times 3, what does that equal? 0. Well, what if I have 0 times 0? 0. Right, so as long as there's a 0 that you're multiplying by, you're going to get 0 as your answer. And that's what we're focusing on today, because everything that I'm giving you is going to be set equal to 0. So the first part is getting us ready for that. It says determine the solutions given the factored form. So I've already factored it for you. You just have to solve for x. We're going to take the set of parentheses, each set of parentheses, and set them equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0, and x plus 5 equals 0. And then we solve. So for the first one, I add 3 to both sides. I get x equals 3. The second one, I subtract 5 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 5. These are my answers. I don't do anything with them other than circle them to show that they're my answers. Letter B. I have a set of parentheses. It's equal to 0, so I set the set of parentheses equal to 0. 2x plus 1 equals 0, and 2x plus 1 equals 0. So I get x equals negative a half, and x equals negative a half. Now, for purposes of this class, you don't have to solve both of them because you give you the same answer. Okay, for other classes, you may because you get into something called multiplicity, but we're not going to get into that. We're just solving. Okay, very basic of factoring trinomials with solving. Letter C, each set of parentheses equals 0. I solve, I get x equals negative 9 and x equals 9. Now letter D is a bit different. I only see one set of parentheses. So I take that one set of parentheses and I set it equal to 0. And I solve. And by the way, if you get decimals for this one or this one, that's okay. I just left it as fractions. However, there's one more. There's an x on the outside of that parenthesis. So because there's an x on the outside of the parenthesis, I still have to solve. It's just not in a set of parentheses. So I take that x and I set it equal to 0. And I don't have anything to do on that one. X just equals 0 for one of the solutions, and x equals a third for the other solution. Meaning if I were to take x as 0 and plug it in, 0 times negative 1 equals 0. That's a true statement. If I plug in a third, I get a third times 3 times a third is 1, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So a third times 0 equals 0. That's a true statement. Now the rest of the examples. 2 things of note. Number 1, you do not have to use this. Just like I wrote here, it's an organizational thing. Same thing here and on the other ones. You do not have to use that. This is how I taught it. Okay, so just listing your factors, figuring out which ones add to your middle number, and so on and so forth. The second thing to note is that we're adding one more step to what we've already done. So the other day we factored an expression, something with no equal sign. Now we're solving. So we're doing the same steps, we're just adding one more step, and that's right here. This is the new piece of information that we're adding, and that's why we just did example 1. So step 1 is to list the factors of negative 12, or just 12, I should say. So 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. My signs are negative, negative. Well, if they're negative, negative, that means the larger factor is negative, making the smaller factor positive. So now I got to see which ones add to give me negative 1. Remember, negative x is just like negative 1x. So 1 plus negative 12 does not work. 2 plus negative 6 does not work. 3 plus negative 4 does work. So those are my factors, and that's what I put in the parentheses. A 3, which means a positive 3. A minus 4, which means minus 4. Now, because this is an equation and it's equal to 0, I set it equal to 0, and then I solve. The same thing that we just did in example 1. I take one set of parentheses, set it equal to 0. Take the other set of parentheses, set it equal to 0. I get 2 answers. So those are my solutions. X equals negative 3 and x equals 4. And if you were to take both of those and you plug it back into this equation, it would make it true. So example 3, same thing. You don't have to use this. It's an organizational thing. I would, though, remind you to list the factors of the last term. Factors of 20, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Signs go plus, plus, so that means everything's positive. And I figure out which ones add to give me the positive 9x. Well, that would be the 4 and the 5 add to give me that. Because it's equal to 0, that means I'm solving. I set this set of parentheses equal to 0 and this set of parentheses equal to 0. And I get my 2 answers. The remaining 2 are the exact same concept, different numbers. List your factors, figure out what your signs are, figure out which ones add to give you the middle number, and then set your factors equal to 0 and solve. So if you have questions, make sure you let me know.